Hi everybody, and welcome to today's webinar from Greenstone and with our guest speaker today from SASB. So today we're going to be discussing the SASB standards and how they link to other ESG reporting frameworks. So I'm David Wynn, the Managing Director for North America at Greenstone, and we're joined today by Neil Stewart, who's the Director of Corporate Outreach for SASB. In today's 30 minutes, we've got quite a lot that we're going to be covering, but we do encourage you to send through questions. Some people have sent through questions in advance, which is great. So we'll look to try and cover those in the content today. You can use the GoToWebinar question section. So please do send through questions. We will be following up after today's webinar with an FAQ document and also any direct questions as well. So in terms of an agenda, we are going to be looking firstly at some key trends in the framework's landscape. So I'll be sort of setting the scene around some of the challenges that we're seeing in reporting and what's going on with the global frameworks, including looking at risks and opportunities. And then I'll be passing over to Neil, who's going to take us through the recent SASB and IIRC merger and what it means for reporting, and then get into a bit more detail around linkages with SASB and other frameworks. So welcome, Neil. I don't know if you want to give a short introduction as well.
Oh, thank you very much, David, and thanks to Greenstone for involving SASB in this. And just to give the very big picture to start, my role is as Director of Corporate Outreach is working with companies, building awareness, building understanding of the standards, and helping with implementation where needed. And for anyone who is not familiar with SASB, SASB is a global standard setter for ESG reporting. And what is a standard setter? It simply means that we define the topics and metrics to give companies and investors the language to really communicate about ESG performance. And I'll be happy to explain a little bit more of that later after you set the scene for us, David.
Great, thanks, Neil. Wonderful. Yeah, so as I say, please do send through any questions that you have as we go through today's webinar. So just a brief introduction to Greenstone for anybody who's not familiar. We're a sustainability software company, so we provide software solutions to businesses to help them better manage their sustainability data and enable being a responsible business through different solutions. So enterprise level data aggregation through the supply chain in our supplier portal product, and also for private equity investors through Investor Portal that enables them to gather data from their portfolios. So in addition to our SASB Inside accreditation, we also are CDP Gold and GRI accredited software solution provider. So really it's my job to sort of set the scene on some of the key trends in the sustainability framework landscape. Not an easy job given the speed and the amount of things that are happening within sustainability reporting. I've had to update these slides numerous times already this week in terms of things that are announced and released. But just to pick up on some of the key trends and put these into sort of 5 topics in terms of what we're seeing in the landscape. First and foremost, COVID. So from a sustainability reporting perspective, it's really now that organizations are starting to think about how to communicate the impacts of 2020 within their sustainability reports. And that's both with a materiality lens in terms of topics, but also from a practical data perspective as well, and how do they actually collect data and information. So trends-wise, I don't need to tell you, but COVID's been something of a global reset in terms of reporting. We've got trends around companies looking at reflecting, restructuring, rebuilding, and then even sort of looking at a wider understanding of supply and origin, redefining corporate purpose, and then more specifically things like working from home emissions. So it's really driving a lot of the sustainability agenda in terms of the kind of content of reporting at the moment. The other key trend is TCFD, so the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. Many of you may have disclosed, using TCFD or looked at this, and really looking at risks and opportunities is something that is now becoming much more prevalent. Investor audiences are really looking for that type of information within disclosures, and it really underpins the principles of governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets within the reliability of what companies are disclosing. And when we think about risks and opportunities, really we're seeing companies mature beyond just thinking about maybe the physical risks. So historically within sustainability reports, companies would think about climate risks and physical acute risks to their business when it comes to climate change. But actually, transitional risks like policy and technology are becoming areas that people are looking at, and also opportunities as well. So whilst climate change obviously presents risks to companies, those that innovate and really lean into the opportunities of climate change as a business will be the ones that illustrate the most resilience. So software-wise, increasingly companies were helping them to track that type of information and going deeper into collecting specific risks and opportunities from within their businesses. It wouldn't be a sustainability webinar then without talking about net zero as a trend. There's been huge momentum in terms of organizations pledging to net zero commitments and putting a net zero lens on their reporting within there. One of the key things with that is at the moment there isn't a sort of global governance structure for what we mean by net zero. And one of my updates, which I did to my slides today, was the Science Based Target Initiative have launched a public consultation on a net zero criteria. It opened today and it's open until the end of February. And so really that's looking to leverage all the good work that the Science Based Target Initiative has done to expand that to set a net zero criteria in terms of how companies talk about net zero. So yeah, would definitely encourage you to have a look at that if that's something that your business is looking at. And then again, really it's useful for us annually to look at BlackRock. So Larry Fink, as the CEO of BlackRock, is very influential in terms of the communications he puts out. SASB and TCFD being the key frameworks that were recommended in 2020 and again in 2021, re-emphasizing that. But again, this week, also looking at encouraging businesses to look at net zero in terms of their thinking from a sort of sustainability lens. And then the final 2 points I'll just touch on very lightly. Greenstone, if you have a look on our website, we've done a couple of webinars recently in much more depth around these topics. So one of them is the EU taxonomy. And this is a unified classification system that looks to provide a common language for investors and corporates to talk about economic activities in the context of sustainability. So as I say, there's some great content on the Greenstone website on this in particular. And then more broadly, the final kind of trend is technology for disclosure. So we only see this really increasing in terms of organizations really looking at non-financial data with the lens that they would typically look at financial information, where it's decision ready in terms of its reliability, and being able to make either investment decisions on that or performance decisions on that in terms of how as a business you're going to drive towards being a more sustainable organization. So with those key trends, what we're then as organizations facing, or what we see in terms of looking to do that, is looking at different frameworks and standards to be able to help organizations align their content. And I know that Neil's going to pick up on this in a little bit more detail in terms of the roles of frameworks and the roles of standards. From a external lens perspective, it's just a whole kind of crossword puzzle in terms of letters out there in terms of different standards or frameworks or guides or regulations that companies are looking to tackle and align content with. And on top of all of those, you've also then got internal frameworks in terms of your own corporate pillars and themes that are material for the business. And so really when it comes to thinking about data and how that feeds into it, what we've really seen is the role of software, but also more integrated thinking in terms of leveraging the alignment between these different areas. So this is just a simple illustration here looking at the roles that different frameworks and standards might provide, where you've got very prescriptive and specific questionnaires like CDP, and then more flexible frameworks like the Sustainable Development Goals, for example. And really from an innovation perspective, it's about, as a business, centralizing data to then be able to facilitate multiple frameworks through a mapping feature. And so that's really what we see today in terms of best-in-class reporting. So hopefully that set the scene now, and I'm going to pass over to Neil, who's going to really kind of dive into the SASB side of things in a little bit more detail. Just before we do that, just sort of, we have a poll which should be coming through. So this poll should be coming to the audience and popping up on the screen, hopefully. And then, yeah, so once this opens, if you want to click on to the responses here, this is just to kind of gauge a little bit of background. So this is asking, how does your business currently use the SASB standards? So if you want to click on to those responses, and then the results should be coming through. But in the meantime, I'll pass over to Neil, who's going to take us through the SASB portion of today's webinar.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the results of this, David. We codified our standards at the end of 2018. In 2019, we had an initial batch of 117 companies reporting using the standards. In 2020, we had over 540, so nearly a fourfold increase between the first and second full year of the standards being out there. We're quite curious to see who's in the audience.
Great. So hopefully the poll has closed, and now we can have a look at those results.
Interesting results. Glad to see some users in the audience, new and existing ones, and considering, strong group considering in the future. I'm glad you didn't have an answer that was like, no, we'll never use them, because
no, we didn't put that in.
Good. So I will go ahead and share my screen now. Sharing. Okay. Good. Right. Well, again, thanks to Greenstone for having me to present. I'm very pleased to get to talk to this group about SASB. And I'll note that this will not be a sort of basic or introductory conversation about SASB. There's a lot of resources on our website, a lot of content and material, but the real gist of what I'm going to talk about today is to talk about how about the recent SASB IIRC merger, what that means for ESG reporting, some of the linkages between SASB and the recommendations of the TCFD, and point to some resources around the different frameworks, SASB and different frameworks. We did get some advanced questions from corporate reporters seeking quite practical implementation advice, and again, that's available in publications and webinars and resources available from SASB. Our website is really set up to give a step-by-step guide to to implementing the SASB standards. And also you can reach out to me directly. I'd be very happy to make a connection with you. So who is SASB? What is SASB? We're an independent nonprofit. We were created about a decade ago, really driven by market demand. As investors began integrating ESG, they didn't have the decision useful ESG data they needed to make their stock picking and voting decisions right across mainstream portfolios. They needed data that was consistent over time, that was comparable between companies, and that was reliable. To meet that demand from investors, SASB created industry-specific standards across 77 industries. So when we say standards, what is a standard? Each of those 77 industry standards has a subset of topics and metrics, along with the technical protocols that are likely to be material for that industry. So we follow rigorous evidence-based, market-informed processes to administer these standards. They're designed very much for investors. So we're laser focused on investors as an audience, in contrast to some other standards and frameworks. We're guided by a very strong conceptual framework that's really grounded in financial materiality. So what is the impact on the company, on the balance sheet, on financial performance, on cost of capital? Some of the benefits to companies in adopting SASB standards are, again, that they're market driven. This is what investors want. I think it's fair to say that over the last year, we've really seen investor attention coalesce around SASB and TCFD. The other benefit to companies is that they really serve to link ESG to strategy and financial performance. And finally, because of the limited set of material topics per industry, they're cost effective to implement. All right, so the big news lately is this merger. Now, David talked about the crossword puzzle of the landscape, or as it's commonly called, the alphabet soup. This is a huge pain point for companies. That is the complexity of the ESG disclosure landscape. Answering this call is this merger announcement. This is really the very first tangible step towards simplifying the field. So we're merging the International Integrated Reporting Council with SASB, because these really are the two largest organizations right now focused on how sustainability impacts enterprise value, how sustainability impacts the corporation. We're also focused on how to link sustainability information with the information in the financial statements. So some common questions right up front about this merger. How does it change the standards and the IR framework? The answer is that it does not, certainly not in the near term. SASB standards and the IR framework are complementary tools that can be used together or independently, and they will continue that way. Another question we get is this meant to compete with the GRI? The answer is no. We work very much with the GRI. In fact, the GRI is one of the founders of IIRC. This, if anything, will strengthen and accelerate the work that we're doing to cooperate with GRI. Another question is this set up as a competitor or meant to compete with the global sustainability standards board that the IFRS Foundation is considering setting up? And again, the answer is no, absolutely not. If anything, this strengthens our work with the IFRS Foundation toward a global reporting system. So some benefits of this merger: it does simplify the field. It globalizes both organizations. SASB is traditionally US based, although we're used globally, but we're based in the US, and this now gives us a global footprint. So some of the things that we'll be focused on is, for example, making sure that the IR framework's 6 capitals are more closely aligned with SASB's 5 sustainability dimensions, right? So there can be confusion there, but that's one of our first pieces of work going forward, is making sure that they align well. SASB CEO Janine Gilliatt will be the CEO of this new Value Reporting Foundation, which is the name of the unified organization. Will be headquartered in both San Francisco and in London, and we intend to keep working very much and very strongly with the IFRS Foundation, with IOSCO, and so on, towards a comprehensive corporate reporting solution. So when we think about IR and SASB, this is a good way to start thinking about standards and frameworks and how they fit together. So this is quite an important differentiation, I believe, as we start to make sense of the alphabet soup. SASB provides a set of standards. We are based on due process. We're very prescriptive. Frameworks such as IR or TCFD are higher level, more macro, more principles based. Okay, and so a simple way to remember this is that frameworks tell you how to report, standards tell you what to report. And the important thing too about standards and frameworks is they fit very well together. They're complementary. So SASB standards or GRI standards can fit very well within and alongside frameworks like IR and TCFD. So this slide shows the building blocks of a comprehensive reporting solution that really are already in place. The one layer that you don't see here, if you consider these the foundation, the layer on top would be the local jurisdiction layer. So for example, what the EU is working on in terms of NFRD could fit as the next level in this structure of reporting. SASB and TCFD are a really good example of standards and frameworks going together. So, and this is the second theme that I'm tackling today, how SASB and TCFD are linked. So TCFD really focuses on two types of risk: physical risk, transition risk. Within transition risk, we have regulatory risk, and SASB has mapped these risks to financial impact on companies in different industries. And on the flip side of that, transition risks are mirrored by a range of opportunities that come with decarbonization, with the move to a net zero world. So now companies and investors can really identify the climate risks and opportunities and how they have financial materiality impacts on long-term value. But you can see here in this diagram, this is the famous TCFD onion, as we call it. And SASB really fits very well at the heart of that onion, where we get to metrics and targets. So looking at climate risk through the lens of governance, strategy, risk management, and then at the heart of that, the comparable metrics and targets. And to get comparable metrics and targets, you need to look industry by industry, and that's where SASB can fit well in this structure. We've done quite a bit of work on this, and here are a couple of resources that we put together along with the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, CDSB, in 2019. So an implementation guide and a good practice handbook and reporting on TCFD using both the CDSB framework as well as the SASB industry-specific standards. Now, this past year has been an incredible year for advancement towards a global system of reporting. These are two very important resources that SASB has done along with CDP, CDSB, IIRC, and GRI. The first was a statement of intent to work together. It really maps out some common language and visualizations and clears up a lot of confusion. The second paper we put out in December is a prototype climate disclosure standard. Now, important to know about that, this is not ready or meant to be a reporting tool, not yet. This is not based on due process. We haven't done any consultation on it. What it instead is meant to do is to give a potential global sustainability standards board that the IFRS Foundation could set up, to give that body a running start, to show how we have the pieces in place now to already have sustainability reporting standards incorporating these 5 very important frameworks and standard setters. So a little bit about what we're showing. To start with, what we have to acknowledge that there are different audiences with different needs. So in this diagram, what you see is, first of all, in this small pink box, that's information already represented in the financial statements. Okay, so that's what FASB and IASB look at. In the middle purple box, that's where SASB is, and that is really focused on financial materiality, on the creation or the erosion of enterprise value creation. And then finally, in the outer gray box, that audience for the outer gray box, that's really that's broader, wider society. So the purple box is for investors or providers of financial capital. The outer gray box is for a much broader range of stakeholders, including investors, but a range of stakeholders, from employees to civil society to regulators and NGOs and so on. Okay, and that outer gray box that's reporting on sustainability matters that impact people, planet, society. All right, so the purple box is about the effect of the environment or societal issues on the company, on the enterprise, and on value creation. The outer gray box is about the company's impact out into the world. So as we can start to map where are the different frameworks and standards in this ecosystem. And as you can see, again, the small pink box is the accounting standard setters. Then you widen out to a broader range of issues that aren't in the financial statements, but that do affect corporate value. And that's where SASB and the CDSB is focused. IR is focused on tying those two areas together. And then finally, you have those standards and as well as the CDP, that their roots are really in the impact of the impact on the environment and on people. Okay, and GRI, broad range of issues, CDP very much climate and other environmental issues. One thing to note is that we, even separate from the group of 5 work, as it's called, SASB is working very much with GRI around interoperability and making sure that where there are points of overlap, we agree on definitions of topics and metrics. The aim is so that a company could be gathering the data once and reporting it through the right channels to the different audiences. So hopefully we'll streamline and clear up a lot of confusion in the ESG reporting world. A little bit about our climate prototype. Okay, again, this is meant to show how we've got the building blocks already in place to get towards a comprehensive global system of reporting. One very important thing is what we're mapping out in terms of content. We believe the TCFD's pillars are a very suitable framework, not just for climate risk, but right across ESG. So that the paper we put out in December is not just a climate disclosure prototype, but it's really a prototype standard for many different types of issues, but following the TCFD pillars. So this is what it will look like. And for any accountants or preparers of financial statements in the audience, this will look very familiar. This is what how you start to construct an accounting standard, but in this case, it's an accounting standard for sustainability. Okay, so this is all the elements, including the description and the analysis of governance and strategy and risk management, and then again, at the heart of that, metrics and targets. So some resources to get to know SASB better, and if you're interested in beginning to report to SASB standards, this is a good resource to start with. It has a lot of signposts and links and case studies. This implementation primer will certainly help you map out your path. One last thing about SASB standards important for you to know is that there is no fee, there's no cost for a corporate reporter to download and use the SASB standards to report. It's another common question we get asked. David, I'll turn it back to you. And again, thank you very much for having me to help explain SASB.
Great, Neil, thank you so much for joining us today to take us through that. I think it's a really exciting time for SASB in terms of that growth in the last year and the merger with IIRC. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what's next with that. And yeah, thanks for taking us through that today. We've got some questions through from the audience, so we will be sort of following up with those that registered with an FAQ document. If anybody has specific questions that they want to send through to Neil around SASB or to Greenstone about our SASB accredited software, then please do get in touch with us. But yeah, otherwise, just thank you to Neil for joining, and thank you to everybody else for joining on the webinar today.
Thank you, David.